Hello dear students, welcome to the Botany class. Myself Miss Chaithra, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany. Today in this video, I am going to deal with the topic Types of Life Cycles in Algae, which comes under Unit 3 in your syllabus. All of you would have known about algae. In lower classes, you might have studied this topic, right? So what do you mean by algae? So algae are the diverse group of organisms that have the ability to conduct photosynthesis, or you can say these are the very simple, usually small plants that grow in or near water and do not have ordinary leaves or roots. So algae means these are the simple small plant body found in aquatic organisms and have the ability to conduct photosynthesis. So because of this nature, because of the photosynthesis, they can synthesize their own food. Okay, now let's move on to the general characters of algae. In this slide, I am including some of the general characters. So in that first character is the algal members are eukaryotes. So what do you mean by prokaryotes and eukaryotes? So based on the presence or the absence of nucleus, the organisms are of two types, prokaryotes as well as eukaryotes. Prokaryotes means these organisms do not have true nucleus. That means nucleus is absent or nucleus is not surrounded by the nuclear envelope. Whereas in eukaryotes, they possess well-defined nucleus, and here the nucleus is surrounded by the nuclear envelope. So the algal member possess well-defined nucleus, hence they are eukaryotes in nature. They are eukaryotic in nature. So this is about the first point. Let's move on to the second point. Most of them are unicellular, but some are multicellular. So what do you mean by unicellular and multicellular? Based on the number of cells, the organisms are classified into two types, unicellular and multicellular. Unicellular means it is made up of single cell. The organism is made up of, the body of the organism is made up of single cell. Whereas multicellular means here the body is composed of many cells. So if the organism is made up of single cell, then it is called as unicellular organism. And if the organism is composed of many cells, then it is called as multicellular. In algae, most of the species or most of the members are unicellular in nature, but some of them are multicellular also. So this is about the second character. Now we will move on to the third character, that is about the mode of nutrition. Here the mode of nutrition is autotrophic or phototrophic. So what do you mean by autotrophic? Autotrophic means these organisms possess a pigment called chlorophyll. So because of the presence of this pigment, by using sunlight, they can synthesize their own food. Hence, the nature is autotrophic. So this is about the third character. We'll move on to the fourth character. They produce oxygen that is returned to the atmosphere. So during photosynthesis, what happens is carbon dioxide and water are accepted by the algal members or absorbed by the algal members, and in return they give oxygen, and this oxygen is released into the atmosphere. So during photosynthesis of the algae, oxygen is produced and this oxygen is released into the external environment. Now we'll move on to the size of the algal members. The size may vary from microscopic to macroscopic, that is about hundreds of feet in length. And these members do not have true roots, stems and leaves. During reproduction, They form the gametes, male and female gametes. Here the male gamete is called as the sperm and the female gamete is called as the egg. And about the habitat, most of the algal members are found in aquatic habitats, that means both in the freshwater as well as in the marine habitats, and some of them are also found in moist soil habitats. So majority of the algal members are found in aquatic habitat, whereas some of the members are also found in the moist soil. And the last character is most have flagella. For the purpose of motility or for the purpose of movement, the algal members possess flagella, or the gametes of the algal members possess flagella. So these are about the general characters of algae. Now we'll move on to the next topic, types of life cycle in algae. So what do you mean by life cycle? So life cycle means during the growth and the development of the algae, they exhibit various morphological and cytological changes. Okay, once again I'll repeat, during the growth and the development of algae, these algal members exhibit various changes. These changes may be morphological or cytological, and this sequence of changes found during the growth and the development is called as life cycle. So life cycle means it is the sequence of various changes that occurs during the growth and the development of the plant. It is the sequence of all different phases or events through which an organism passes from a diploid zygote of one generation to the zygote of next generation through haploid gametes. So this is about the definition of life cycle. Now we'll move on to the types. There are 5 types of life cycles in algae. They are haplontic, diplontic, haplodiplontic, haplobiontic and diplobiontic life cycle. So these are the 5 types of life cycle seen in algae. Now we'll study the different types of life cycles in detail one by one in this video. We'll move on to the first type of life cycle, that is haplontic life cycle. So now this haplontic life cycle, this is the most common type of life cycle in the algae. So the most common type of life cycle in the algae is haplontic life cycle. It is the most primitive and simplest type, and the life cycle is here diphasic. So what do you mean by diphasic? Diphasic means it possesses 2 phases. So haplontic life cycle is diphasic, means it possesses 2 phases, the gametophyte phase and the sporophyte phase. So of these 2 phases, the dominant phase is here gametophyte phase. So of these 2 phases, gametophytic phase and sporophytic phase, the gametophytic phase is dominant, and always this gametophytic phase is haploid. So always the gametophytic phase is haploid, and in this haplontic life cycle, the gametophytic phase is the dominant phase. Okay. So what happens during the life cycle? From this gametophytic plant body. Now what do you mean by gametophyte and the sporophyte? Gametophyte means gamete producing plant body. It produces the gametes. Whereas sporophyte means it produces the spores. Am I clear? So gametophyte is the gamete bearing plant, whereas sporophyte means spore producing plant. Now what happens during a haplontic life cycle? So as I said before, the haplontic life cycle, here the dominant phase is haploid gametophyte phase. So during life cycle, this haploid gametophyte produces the gametes, male and female gametes. So from the gametophytes, gametes are produced, and these gametes are haploid. Okay, both of the male and female gametes are haploid in nature. Now on fusion, that means these gametes, male and female gametes, fuse to form a diploid zygote. So zygote is formed on the fusion of male and female gametes, and this zygote is diploid in nature. And the diploid phase in the life cycle is represented by the zygote only. So here the diploid phase in the life cycle is represented by the zygote. So in this haplontic life cycle, the major portion of the life cycle is occupied by the gametophytic phase. That means about 75% of the life cycle is occupied by the gametophytic phase, whereas a small amount is, or small portion of the life cycle is represented by the diploid phase, that means the sporophytic phase. So on fusion of the male and female gametes, zygote is formed, right? So this zygote, it undergoes meiosis. As a result of this, it produces the zoospores. Now zygote is diploid, but this zygote undergoes meiosis so that it produces the zoospores. Now all the zoospores are here haploid. The zoospores are haploid. Now zoospores on germination produces the haploid gametophyte. So zoospore undergoes mitosis and develops into gametophyte plant body, and this gametophyte is haploid in nature. And from this gametophyte, again the male and female gametes are produced by mitosis. Am I clear? So this is about the haplontic life cycle, and examples for this haplontic life cycle are Chlamydomonas and Eulothrix. So this is about the schematic representation of the haploid life cycle. So during the life cycle, it produces two types of phases, gametophytic phase and sporophytic phase. So the gametophytic phase, it is occupied by the, major portion of the life cycle is occupied by the gametophytic phase. So during gametophytic phase, gametes are produced, and these gametes are always haploid in nature. And on fusion, the gametes produces the zygote. So this zygote is formed by the fusion of male and female gametes. Now this zygote, it undergoes meiosis. As a result of this, zoospores are produced. Now the zoospores are haploid in nature. Now the zoospores later on undergoes mitosis and develops into gametophyte. So this is about the haplontic life cycle. Am I clear? So now let's move on to the second type of life cycle, that is diplontic life cycle. So this diplontic life cycle, it is the reversal of haplontic life cycle. So diplontic life cycle, it is the reversal of haplontic life cycle. And like haplontic, this diplontic life cycle, it is also diphasic. What do you mean by diphasic? Diphasic means it contains two phases. But in haplontic, of the two phases, the dominant phase is gametophyte phase. Whereas in diplontic life cycle, the dominant phase is sporophytic phase. Here the dominant phase is sporophytic phase. And this sporophyte is always diploid in nature. The sporophyte, it is always diploid in nature. Now what happens during the life cycle? So now the haploid gametophyte, it produces the gametes during the reproduction. So from the gametophyte, which is haploid, the gametes are produced, and these gametes on fusion produces the zygote, and now this zygote do not undergo meiosis, whereas in haplontic life cycle the zygote undergoes meiosis and forms the zoospores, right? Whereas in diplontic life cycle the zygote do not undergoes meiosis, rather it develop into a diploid sporophyte. So instead of meiosis, it undergoes mitosis and produce the diploid sporophyte. So this is about the diplontic life cycle, and the examples for diplontic life cycles are fucus, sargassum, diatoms, etc. Now this is the schematic representation of diplontic life cycle. So in this life cycle you can clearly observe the gametophytic as well as the sporophytic phase. The major portion is occupied by the diploid phase, and a very small portion is occupied by the haploid phase. So during the growth and the development, what happens is, from the sporophyte on meiosis, gametangia are produced. So from the sporophyte, gametangia are produced, and from the gametangia gametes are produced. So from the sporophyte on meiosis, gametes are produced during the growth, and these gametes on fusion produces the diploid zygote. So first from the sporophyte it undergoes meiosis. As a result of this, gametangia are formed, and from the gametangia gametes are produced, and these gametes fuse together to form the diploid structure called the zygote. Now this zygote undergoes mitosis. Once again I will repeat, the zygote undergoes mitosis. As a result of this, sporophytic plant body is produced. So this is about the diplontic type of life cycle. Am I clear? Now let's move on to the third type of life cycle, that is haplodiplontic. And like haplontic and the diplontic life cycles, this haplodiplontic life cycle is also diphasic, means it contains two phases, gametophytic phase as well as sporophytic phase. Now what happens during this type of life cycle? So here what happens is, the sporophytic plant, it produces sporangia. So from the sporophyte, sporangia is produced, and this sporangia produces the haploid zoospores by meiosis. Okay, from the sporophyte, sporangia are produced, and from the sporangia on meiosis, zoospores are produced. Now this zoospore, it develops into haploid gametophytic plant body. So the zoospore develops into haploid gametophytic plant body. And now from this gametophytic plant body, gametes are produced. So gametes are produced from the gametophyte. Now there are two types of gametes, male gamete and female gamete. Now these male and female gametes fuse together to form the diploid structure called zygote. So zygote is formed by the fusion of male and female gametes. Am I clear? So these are the events taking place during the haplodiplontic type of life cycle. Now, there are two types of haplodiplontic life cycle. They are isomorphic and heteromorphic. So, what do you mean by isomorphic? Isomorphic means here the gametophytic and the sporophytic phase are morphologically similar. Both the phases, means gametophytes as well as the sporophytic phases, they are morphologically similar. That means they are externally similar. Example for this isomorphic type of life cycle: ulva, chetophora, etc. Heteromorphic means here the gametophytic as well as the sporophytic phase are morphologically dissimilar. That means they are externally different. Okay. In isomorphic, both the phases are morphologically similar, whereas in heteromorphic, both the phases are externally dissimilar or externally different. An example for heteromorphic type of life cycle: laminaria, urospora, etc. So this is about the haplodiplontic type of life cycle. Now this is about the schematic representation of haplodiplontic life cycle. So during this type of life cycle, from the sporophyte, zoospores are produced, and during this event meiosis takes place, and from the zoospore gametophyte is developed, and this gametophyte, it produces the gametes, and gametes on fusion produces the zygote. Now this zygote undergoes mitosis. As a result of this, sporophyte is produced. So in this way the life cycle takes place in algae. The haplodiplontic life cycle takes place in algae. And here the duration of both the haploid and the diploid, gametophytic and sporophytic generations are almost same. The duration is almost same. Okay, so this is about the haplodiplontic life cycle. Now let's move to the next type of life cycle, that is haplobiontic life cycle. So this is the fourth type of life cycle, haplobiontic, and in this life cycle it shows three phases, hence it is triphasic, whereas haplontic, diplontic and haplodiplontic are diphasic, means exhibit only two phases, whereas in haplobiontic the life cycle is triphasis or triphasic, means it exhibit three phases. Out of three phases, the one is diploid and two haploid phases, and the three phases are gametophyte phase, which is haploid, zygote, it is a diploid phase, and carposporophyte, which is the haploid phase. So in this way there are two haploid phases, one is gametophyte phase and carposporophyte phase, and one diploid phase, that is zygote, means sporophyte phase. Okay. So here what happens is, during the life cycle, the gametophyte phase, it produces the haploid gametes. So from the gametophyte, gametes are produced, and these gametes on fusion forms the zygote. Am I clear? So from the gametophytic phase, gametes are produced, and these gametes fuse to form the zygote. Now this zygote is diploid. Okay, so this is about the diploid phase. Now the zygote undergoes reduction. Reduction means meiosis. As a result of this, haploid spores are formed. So on meiosis, the zygote develops haploid spores, and these haploid spores germinate to form the carposporophyte. Okay, once again I will repeat. The gametophytic phase produces the gametes, and these gametes on fusion produces the zygote, which is a diploid phase, and the zygote undergoes meiosis to form the haploid spores, and the phase is called as carposporophyte phase. Now the carposporophyte, it produces the carpospores, and these carpospores are haploid in nature, and on germination the carpospore produces the gametophytic plant. Okay. So once again I will repeat the process. So from the gametophytic plant body, gametes are produced, and these gametes on fusion produces the zygote. The zygote is diploid. This zygote undergoes meiosis and produces the haploid phase, that is carposporophyte phase, and this carposporophyte, it produces carpospores, and the carpospore on germination develops into gametophytic plant. Example for this haplobiontic life cycle, rhodophyceae members. So this is about the schematic representation. So here what happens, from the gametophytic phase, gametes are produced, and these gametes on fusion produces the zygote. The zygote undergoes meiosis. As a result of this, carposporophyte is produced, and this carposporophyte forms the carpospores, and carpospores on germination develops into gametophytic plant body. So these are about the haplobiontic life cycle. Am I clear? So next we'll move on to the last type of life cycle, that is diplobiontic, and it is the most complex and advanced type of life cycle in algae. And like haplobiontic, this diplobiontic is also triphasic. The life cycle is triphasic, means it contains 3 phases. In that, one is haploid phase and the other 2 diploid phases. Whereas in haplobiontic, 2 haploid phases and 1 diploid phase is present. Whereas in diplobiontic, there are 2 diploid phases and 1 haploid phase. And these phases are carposporophyte phase, gametophyte phase, and tetrasporophyte phase. So of these, the carposporophyte and the tetrasporophyte phases are diploid in nature, whereas gametophytic phase is haploid. Okay. Now what happens during the life cycle? On fusion of the male and female gametes, zygote is formed, and this zygote, it is diploid in nature, and this diploid zygote, it undergoes mitosis. As a result of this, diploid carposporophytic phase is formed. So from the zygote, on mitosis, carposporophyte phase is produced. Now this carposporophyte produces the diploid carpospores, and the carpospores germinates to form diploid tetrasporophytic phase. Now this diploid tetrasporophyte produce haploid spores called tetraspores by meiosis, and on germination these tetraspores develops into haploid gametophyte. And once again, from the gametophytic generation, male and female gametes are produced, and on fusion diploid zygote is formed. In this way the life cycle takes place. So thus in diplobiontic life cycle, two diploid phase, carposporophyte and tetrasporophyte, alternate with the haploid gametophytic phase. So example for this, Polysiphonia. So this is about the diplobiontic life cycle. So in this what happens is, from the carposporophyte, that is from the zygote, which is diploid in nature, carposporophyte is produced. So zygote undergoes mitosis. As a result of this, carposporophyte is produced, and this is the carposporophyte phase, which is diploid phase. And from this carposporophyte, carpospores are produced, and the carpospores are also diploid in nature. And the carpospores on germination produces the tetrasporophyte. Now the tetrasporophyte is also diploid, but this tetrasporophyte undergoes meiosis. As a result of this, haploid tetraspores are formed. This haploid tetraspores germinates to form the gametophytic plant body, and from gametophyte, gametes are produced, and gametes on fusion to form the zygote. In this way, the cycle takes place. So these are about the different types of life cycle in algae. Is that clear? So finally, these are about the topic types of life cycle in algae. Hope you all understood the topic. Thank you.